Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Peterson. I'm from Los Angeles, and it is my opportunity to give this class today. So, Gurudev often talked about the real Guru who has pierced the veil of nature's splendors is very rare, and that is the Satguru, and that is who we are in the presence of. Following up on that, I'd like to share a letter that Guruji wrote. This would have been in Gurudev's Mahasamadhi in 2011. Guruji writes, "On this special day, I am remembering all of you and praying for all of you, to Gurudev and to God. Today is the Mahasamadhi." Well, let's change that. Today is the birthday, or coming up, is the birthday of Gurudev already, and I'll change the date. I guess it would be 21 years have passed since he left his physical body. Now, Guruji asks, is Gurudev absent in your life, or do you feel his presence? Why do I ask? It is to let you know that the masters are always present. As is your attitude, so is your experience. If you think that Gurudev is no more, you will miss him. If you accept that the Guru is always present within, then you will feel his presence. Gurus are not human beings. Satgurus are not human beings, even though they come to us in human form. It is the duty of every spiritual seeker to establish a strong bond with a Guru preceptor, not with the physical or mortal frame, but with his immortal spirit and teachings. It is my personal experience, Guruji writes, that Gurudev is always present. Along the spiritual journey, the presence of the Guru Preceptor makes the journey easy and enjoyable because he or she is well acquainted with the path as well as our strengths and weaknesses. The Guru is the real strength and support on the spiritual journey. When we live in this world, we spend a lot of time acquiring, accumulating, and protecting worldly possessions and worldly people. But these things are temporary. On the other hand, our loving relationship with God and Gurus and this divine creation will enable us to live happy lives in God consciousness. The Guru Gita, again, verse 299 says, I'll just read the translation, family traditions, wealth, strength, scriptural knowledge, even one's own relatives are useless at the time of death. The Guru alone is the Savior. My loving and dear ones, it is my humble request to all of you that you do not waste precious time. Please follow the teachings of our beloved Gurudev. He is looking from above and watching from within. He is looking from above and watching from within. He is our real friend. He is our real strength. Through prayer and meditation, experience this relationship with him. Please meditate nicely. I bow to Gurudev in all of you. So, my point of bringing this up is we have a week where we often love to share and people love to hear stories of Gurudev. But what is the point of hearing these stories of Gurudev? There's a tendency to just they're beautiful stories. Gurudev in the body was beautiful, was profound, was miraculous, and these stories about him are rich and very entertaining. But I humbly submit that I think the reason that we share them shouldn't be to just be entertained, but to learn from them. I remember back, Guruji became a Paramahamsa Gurudev bestowed on him the title of Paramahamsa in his birthday. I think it's August 10th of 1998, 25 years ago coming up. And at the time, Guruji was not saying that he was realized. This was kind of his play for a while. People would ask him, "Are you realized? Are you realized?" And his answer would be, "What is my being realized going to do for you?" And this sort of comes back again and again and again, and it's just our sort of play, our curiosity to want to know these things. And again, I get it completely, but I think there's a bigger point here. That their life, Guruji says we should study the lives of the masters. Why? In order to learn from them, be enriched by them, and learn from what they did in the context of their life to integrate it into our life so that we too can move forward and get a little closer to this goal line of God realization. Even though the masters say, and Gurudev and many others say, there is no real goal line. There's a story of Guruji has written that Gurudev did an interpretation, metaphorical interpretation on a piece of scripture at one point in his life, and 25 years later, he did a commentary on the same piece of scripture. And it was changed. It wasn't exactly the same. And Guruji said to him, "Gurudev, 25 years ago you said this on this. Now 25 years later you're saying this. 25 years ago you were realized. What happened?" And Gurudev said, "I have 25 more years meditation." God is infinite. Realization is infinite. Gurudev, I believe, and is not the only one that has said, real meditation begins with realization. So what about us? What do we do? So let me share something with you that was useful for me. This is from a talk from Guruji's course that he has given on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. So this isn't a advertisement, but it is from personal experience. I have to share that I get why Guruji didn't talk for 3 years. Go online and you will find 2 profound series that he did. One is on the Bhagavad Gita. 374 classes on the Bhagavad Gita that he did at one of the brahmachari trainings at Bal Ashram. The other one is on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, 195 classes. And I certainly can't speak for Guruji and would never think of it, But maybe what he was suggesting is rather than just showing up to be in his beautiful presence and listen to his talks. I mean, I get that too, no question. But what he has given us there is so deep and so profound. We have in Los Angeles a little group that meet 5 days a week in the morning, and we watch one class. Well, we've been doing it for quite a while, because now we're going through it for the third time. The Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. We did get through the Bhagavad Gita as well. But I must also share that the third time going through, this material is starting to resonate in a way that it's opening itself up. The masters talk about there's Atma Kripa, Guru Kripa, and Shastra Kripa. Atma Kripa is grace of the soul. Guru Kripa is grace of the masters. Shastra Kripa is grace of the scriptures themselves. And they talk about, the Indian tradition, which I humbly bow to, the masters, speak of that the scripture itself is a living entity. And it has the ability to open itself up to you, or maybe not so much till you're ready. I know Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, when I first came to it, I heard of it and I thought, oh great, yeah, let me get this. And I'd sit down and figure, oh yeah, this will be nothing to it. And it was like nothing. I mean, not nothing, but nothing to the degree now that it opens up with this tremendous, profound richness. Along with these classes, there's these beautiful explanations of Guruji on the text and beyond the text. But to get back to this idea of, in these classes, and this idea of our relationship with God, the divine, and really with the masters as well, Guruji in his talks asked the following questions. How can we think of God when we have not seen him? When can we think of God when we have not known him? How can we think of God when we are not sure we have ever really felt him? Has anybody else had that feeling? I know I read those classes and I thought, boy, thank you. There is a kind of a wisdom in the scriptures where and I will refer, another nice explanation of it is from Eckhart Tolle, where he says we get hypnotized by the power of words. We think that if we put a label on something, we know what it is. In truth, all we've done is labeled something that we can now compartmentalize, that we can kind of share with each other and kind of go, I get it, but we don't. In Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it talks about, I forget which one, this just came up in our class a week ago. It talked about Shabda, Artha, and Jnana. Shabda is the word, the sound, and all thought forms a word. And then the word creates an image in the mind. Well, that's Shabda, that's word. It says, what does it say? Then the next level of it is this Artha. What does it mean? So that's a next level. And then the next level to that is, what is the wisdom? Why is it significant? Why is it important? So that's something, again, that we might want to reflect on. I will have to say that my experience with Gurudev, he said many things that I could repeat, but I didn't know what it meant really, and I certainly didn't understand it. One of the good ones was, you are not you, you are the real you. I am not me, I am the real me. I knew what it said. I kind of went, well, I kind of inferred, okay, there's something else that I'm missing here, and I really didn't have any kind of profound understanding of it. That's one example, but I have found that's one. I can't say that I have cracked that one by any stretch of the imagination, but I have a better understanding of it. And many other things that Gurudev said and did, he just really kind of took the essence of it and just squeezed the juice out of it and then just sort of put it out there. And Gurudev was in his later years, just sort of cut it down so much to bullet points that he would repeat again and again and again. And some people would say, Gurudev always says the same thing. And the truth is, he was saying it because we knew what he was saying. We could repeat it, but we didn't really know what it meant, and we really didn't understand the profound wisdom of it. And I will say that with my humble experience, and as to a certain degree, it's opened up again now to the point where I understand it at a deeper level. And that's sort of my experience. Seems to be there's kind of an unfolding and an awakening that I was sharing with Suresh. I'll share this with you. Just the other day it was either a talk I was listening to, I think it was, or something I was reading, but Guruji said, you know, you don't fear death. You don't die. You are an immortal soul. And how many times have I heard that? But for some reason, something sort of, a dim little bit of light went off somewhere in the far corner of my being that sort of went, there is no death. You know, and I sort of link that with Yoganandaji says, we live in the eternal now. That there is no death. That's something, again, to reflect on, something we've heard time and time again, but I will have to say, for me, it was like I kind of put it together and it became more intellectual and a little bit more experiential, and I have to say a little more comforting. Anyway, continuing. How do we think of God when we're not sure we have really felt Him? Very simple but profound questions. Guruji expanded on this topic, saying, we imagine so many things that are not real. Why can't we imagine God, the only thing that is real? Think of that dynamic of the mind. The mind constantly projects, imagines, tempts, exaggerates, infatuates, can never be vacant. Always is putting these dramatizations up into our consciousness that take us here or there, the turbulent mind that pulls us and throws us around. God is the only reality. Except for God, everything else is unreal, untrue, impermanent, and false. We constantly use our imagination, but more often than not, we create trouble in our life through negative imagining and projections, often based on our own anxieties and insecurities. So this imagination really is a tool, can be a tool. The mind making trouble. But remember, we are not the mind, and we can stop the mind from being negative, and we can choose to make it positive. Another thing Gurudev said that I still reflect on a lot, he said, thoughts and God are one. And he said that a lot. From the para, this thought then enters from the causal body, then enters into the astral body. And it's called Pasyanti. This is from the Gyanalini Tantra, Guruji's book. At that time, this Pasyanti, this thought then becomes closed, if you will, in a word, and we get the image in the mind's eye, because every thought is associated with a word. That word then triggers a reaction in the heart, madhyama. And then between stimulus and response, there's this gap. And then we respond. In this particular case, in the Jnana Tantra, Shankalini Tantra, it was where does speech come from? And then Vaikari, the speech comes out. But quite profound, from the para, from this thought comes into the astral body, from the causal body into the astral body, it then triggers in the heart, creates a reaction, and then we respond. Guruji said it's like a swan's neck. And there's this idea between stimulus and response, there's a gap. If we're present enough that we can then choose how we respond, that can really shape our destiny. However, Guruji continues. Guruji says we need to be careful and realize when we are imagining something, it's a mind-generated mirage that we are creating. A yogi always aspires to keep the mind peaceful and positive. Gurudev said if a negative thought comes, then we should turn it back and say, no thank you, and turn it back. And the best way to watch the mind is by watching the breath. And another real helpful, extremely helpful technique for constantly watching the breath is rolling back the tongue. I really come to experience that Khechari Mudra is a gift that keeps on giving. If we roll back our tongue, the nature of it, the tongue then attracts our attention to it, which is higher up, which then takes us into the cranium, where if we're more tuned in, we can hear sound, and we can then watch the breath. And when we're watching the breath and even deeper hearing sound, we can watch the thoughts then coming into the mind. So I remember one of my first interactions with Guruji was in September of 1998, which is coming up 25 years. And he looked at me, and he just looked at me and he went, and that was it. Close the mouth, ideally, roll up the tongue, listen to the divine sound, and watch the breath. And Gurudev would go, which becomes a lot easier if the tongue rolls up, you're watching the breath, because then your concentration is up there. And that was one practice that Gurudev constantly stressed. He'd talk about meditate 5 minutes, Kriya and Ya, 24 hours a day. 24 hours, what's that? Just in the presence, in the divine kingdom. And he constantly talks about getting above the mind, away from the mind, which is creating all this trouble. So getting back to the question of why we can't imagine God, Guruji says it's because we have not used this ability of imagination to be more creative and positive when thinking about God. Again, this is something we can practice, which is something Gurudev stressed. Practice, practice, practice. And for some reason, for a long time, I had this idea that it seemed inappropriate to practice. Practice sort of makes it like it's mundane, that it should just sort of be sacred and just sort of self-appear. Now it is sacred and perhaps it will self-appear, but we can practice it. And that's what Gurudev stressed. Practice, practice, practice. Guruji very clearly stated, even if it is imagination, imagine God is omnipresent. Wherever I am going, there is God. Let it be imagination. Let it be imagination. It is positive imagination. It is not imagination of a worldly relationship. So when I read this, that Guruji said, Gurudev is looking on from above and watching from within. Do I know that? I feel something. And so why not let it be? Allow myself to think that this is Gurudev. Because Gurudev told me once, he said, I taught you yoga, I gave you yoga. You and I are one. That the Guru is within. Now, do we choose to believe it? Can we practice it? Can we feel the presence of Gurudev filling this room? This sacred space that Gurudev was. Well, I don't know, but I'm allowing my imagination to let it be so, to practice that, to allow it to be so. Now don't get, you don't want to be foolish with this, clearly. But Gurudev is with us, and we have many that have examples of very miraculous things that have happened because of a deep relationship with Gurudev. This beautiful family right here can tell you some profound stories with the birth of their beautiful son here that, not to embarrass him, but we have known since he was in his mother's womb, and how much Gurudev was involved with that whole thing. So it's very beautiful. So I'm here to talk a little bit about this glimpses of divine life. And I was fortunate in that I was given 3 things to talk about: sadhana, life with the masters, and economical life. So Gurudev's whole life really was sadhana and really reflected pre-sadhana. So I just wanted to share a little bit from you. This is from the Bhagavad Gita, Gurudev's Bhagavad Gita, and Guruji, verse 15 from Book 1. And the translation is, the power of God, Ishwara, does not create the actions or reactions of any person. God does not act, nor does he make contact with the fruits of actions. Rather, one's own nature leads to action. The omnipresent soul does not sin or perform pious actions. Knowledge is covered by ignorance. Therefore, people are deluded. Gurudev writes, the Lord, soul, is saying, O Arjuna, you, the false identification, are not doing anything. The tendencies of your previous karma are doing everything. Atma, the soul, does everything. The soul is like divine electricity. But here, let's see. In this verse, the Lord emphasizes the destiny of every human being. Each human being has a different destiny. The soul cannot do anything without the preordained force of destiny. In this world, everyone acts according to destiny. In this way they evolve, but without soul, destiny cannot become manifest. That is why everyone should manifest and seek soul. We are born only for soul culture. So this is something to reflect on as well, this aspect of destiny. That there is this prarabdha karma is a blueprint to our life, and as Gurudev is explaining here, this destiny is unfolding. Now I reflected on this, and so that's prarabdha karma, but there's also very much kriya mana, I think they call it, karma, which is the karma of the present moment, which is these different things will happen in our life, which will become an opportunity. Gurudev used to say, opportunity should not be neglected, for it may never return. And he would say that again and again and again and again and again. And what I took from that is what he's also saying is you're given the opportunity, and this opportunity will come, because there's a blueprint. And as I've asked Guruji, our astrology is the time code of our prarabdha karma. So these opportunities will arise. How much we make of these opportunities will really determine the force of our destiny moving forward. So I bring this up because Gurudev is, the first thing I was invited to talk about is sadhana, and Gurudev's sadhana was clearly something that he brought forward from his previous birth. A lot of what I'll be sharing comes from this really profound book called At Thy Feet. Guruji wrote it 10 years ago at the 75th anniversary of Gurudev going into Karar Ashram. And this June 12th, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, will be the 85th anniversary of Gurudev going to Puri. He didn't enter the ashram at first, but we can get to that in a minute. But this is sort of an auspicious, again, time, 85 years ago. So, Gurudev's first guru, he said it was his mother, but it was also his father, very much his father. And his father was, as I understand it, an Orthodox Brahmin and very highly spiritual and a very evolved man. And I know in the Bhagavad Gita, it speaks of if you're a serious seeker, if you don't attain realization in this lifetime, what happens? And Lord Krishna tells them that you will be born into a family of yogis and be able to continue your evolution. Gurudev's father in this book speaks about in every 4 generations of their family, the last name was Bhattacharya, which is a Brahmin name apparently, and I clearly don't know the implications of that, but Indian Hindu culture certainly does. Every 4 generations of their family, a monk is born, and Gurudev has come to fulfill that, I guess, family dynasty karma. Gurudev also has written about and spoken about that his father and mother were very disciplined in the intimacy of their married life. And the father said that he would consult the astrology, that when the time was appropriate when the time was most conducive, he and the mother would come together, which would then lead to producing a very highly evolved child. And Gurudev was, so this was the environment Gurudev was born into. I remember one time we were walking out in the garden with Gurudev, and out of the blue, for some reason, Gurudev just announced, "I am the 10th child of my mother's womb." Anyway, I share that. He had a younger sister. So this is the kind of care that he's brought into the world in this family. The father was also a very good astrologer and immediately cast Gurudev's chart and found out in the chart that Gurudev destiny was such that he was destined to be a monk and a very highly evolved spiritual being. The father did not tell the mother this because the mother was not happy with this. Although later, when Gurudev came to Sri Yukteswar, and there's kind of, I'm going to jump around a bit here, but Gurudev's father was his first guru, who at the age of 10 or 11, he had his brahmachari thread ceremony, and he was given the Gayatri mantra. But the father was a Kula guru. Again, I apologize, I'm not quite sure exactly what that means, but it's important. And there's a family mantra. And Gurudev insisted that the father initiated him into this mantra as well. And the father kind of pushed him a little bit because he was just kind of 11 years old and he didn't think it was quite appropriate. But at 11 years old, Gurudev already had the deep desire for this mantra that he knew would help him on his spiritual quest. To back up a bit from this, before we get to Sri Yukteswar, the father knew Gurudev's destiny. So from the age of 2.5, he had Gurudev sitting next to him while he did his puja, which I understand went on for hours every day, and often he didn't finish till early afternoon. And Gurudev said that when he got restless, his father would give him a piece of sugar cane that he would chew on and he would calm down. Anyway, imagine a 2.5-year-old child sitting there through all this. By the age of 4, Gurudev had learned all the intricate mantras of all this elaborate pujas. Gurudev told me, he said when he was 8 or 9, he said he had memorized all the primary Upanishads. Gurudev had a mind like a mirror. So he's 11, he's at the age of 12. He's very, and there's another beautiful story with Gurudev, is that he was to say the Gayatri mantra, as I understand it, 12 times. And the story, as I remember it, I forget which book was, they used to say this mantra, I don't know if it was before breakfast or it was before lunch, but Gurudev had older brothers and sisters, so he had what were his, I guess, nephews and nieces about the same age. And they would be at the house, and the father would have them in kind of a study room, as I understand it. And he would have them say the Gayatri mantra before they came to lunch. And this one day, he's waiting and he's waiting for Gurudev. And he finally comes to Gurudev. Now, Gurudev's 11, remember? And he said, you know, Rabi was what they called him. Rabindranath Bhattacharya was his birth name. Why aren't you coming? Hurry up. And Gurudev said, I'm not seeing the light. I'm not seeing the light. So he was just not going to say the mantra and then move on until he experienced it. At 11. At 12, his brother and his brother-in-law are disciples of Sri Bijoy Krishna, who was a realized householder yogi that Gurudev went to and had a very deep relationship with. And at one point, Sri Bijoy Krishna told Gurudev that he needed to go to Sri Yukteswar, that Sri Yukteswar could give him what he needed because he knew his goal was self-realization. So the story of going to Sri Yukteswar is interesting. Gurudev was 25 years old. I think he had finished his, as Suresh was telling us this morning, he was a textile engineer, which was a highly prized profession in India. This is in 1932. Gurudev was 25. So he goes to Sarampur Ashram, and he's met by Sri Yukteswar's attendant, Prabhuji, who Gurudev said, I would like to have an audience with Sri Yukteswar. And Prabhuji says, well, you never know how he's going to respond. You know, God bless you, we'll see what happens. So Gurudev went to the door, and Sri Yukteswar was sitting on his tiger skin in Shambhavi Mudra. So you've probably seen the picture. I'm not sure if it's not that one, not the other one we've all seen of him there. Anyway, so Gurudev sits at the door and looks at him and just sort of waits. And he said, Sri Yukteswar's eyes came down, looked at him, and then went back up. So Gurudev took that as an indication that he could come in. So Gurudev came in respectfully from a distance, bowed, and sat silently. After a time, Sri Yukteswar's gaze sat down and he called him over. And as I understand it, if I have this correctly, took Gurudev's hand in his head, and I think and blessed him, and then Gurudev bent down and touched his feet, and they had a conversation. In the conversation, he asked where he was from. Gurudev told him, and Sri Yukteswar said, I have been there, and I know your father. I have seen him from a distance. So that there was kind of a connection there. And he looked at him and he said, so he knew he was a Brahmin, and that was significant. And he said, do you know anything about astrology? And Gurudev said he knew a little because his father taught him astrology, and the way the father taught him was kind of through rhymes. So the father was obviously, he had a brilliant child, but he was also kind of a brilliant teacher as well. So Guruji said, can you cast your chart? And Gurudev said yes, and so he wrote the chart and handed it to Sri Yukteswar. And Sri Yukteswar looked at it and said, your destiny is to be a monk. And Gurudev said, you know, my father cast my chart. He said, he has never mentioned anything about me becoming a monk. And Sri Yukteswar smiled. He said, it's the nature of young people. He said, if you tell them one thing, they will go out of their way to do something else. So, the tremendous wisdom of human nature. And so that established Gurudev's relationship with Sri Yukteswar. And as Suresh shared with us this morning, Gurudev was probably his youngest and last disciple. And Gurudev used to come every weekend, and he would bathe him, and he would bring clothes. And Sri Yukteswar, at this point in his life, personal hygiene was not a high priority for him. He said, I do not have time for a single blink, let alone, you know, bathing or whatever. But Gurudev has written, he said, Yogananda, you know, one of his most cherished disciples, was in the United States. Satyananda was in Rishi. And Gurudev Sri Yukteswar missed them. And Gurudev, showing up with his tremendous spiritual potential, his great humility and love and devotion and sincerity, really opened up Sri Yukteswar's heart. And so Gurudev took first Kriya from Sri Yukteswar. In 1935, Yogananda came to India. And at that time, Sri Yukteswar told Gurudev that he should go to Yogananda. And that he said, because Gurudev had the desire to learn second Kriya and to see Yoganandaji go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And that was the case. He went to Yogananda. Yogananda, like Sri Yukteswar, had the tremendous intuitional power that he could see Gurudev's destiny. So he blessed him, and it was apparently at the house, Yoganandaji's house, I believe in Garpar Road in Calcutta, that Yoganandaji initiated him into second Kriya and went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for him. And I always thought it was kind of profound, given the mission of Kriya Yoga coming to the West, that Sri Yukteswar had the vision to have Gurudev be initiated by Yogananda, that then Yogananda, while having his organization, SRF, is still very much part of Kriya Yoga International. And that had to be through his vision. Gurudev then was a textile engineer living a very disciplined life, very brahmachari life. Gurudev told me, he said, I have never experienced sex joy in my life. This was when we met him in 1979. He was telling that, so he was always very disciplined and directed, even though he was living, a life of culture and luxury. Sri Yukteswar wanted him to come to the ashram, but Gurudev has said, it was my weakness. But it was also Gurudev, I believe, my humble interpretation, also his pragmatism, that he knew he wasn't ready to. Then, I just have a few minutes, so I'll just tell you this kind of quick story. Destiny in the hand of fate. So, Gurudev had a friend whose name was Raghu, that they went to engineering school together, and Gurudev was quite brilliant, but he spent a lot more time on spiritual activities, whereas Raghu wasn't as smart as Gurudev, but he was a hardworking student. When the exams came out for their class, Raghu was first and Gurudev was second in the class. Cut to, there was a position in a textile company in Calcutta, I assume, and both Raghu and Gurudev applied for the job. They both went for their interviews. When the interview results came out, Gurudev came first and Raghu came second. So what to do? The company gave a house, but they only had one house, and it went to Gurudev. And Raghu was a little concerned because this was a hardship financially for him. Gurudev's open-heartedness said, you and I are close. I will share the house with you. We will live together in harmony, and it will be a beautiful thing. Gurudev always went for the win-win and was very generous. So they lived together, and Gurudev excelled in this company. However, Raghu had the desire to be married. So he announces to Gurudev that I have the desire to be married. And Gurudev said, congratulations, beautiful, go on with your life. Raghu said, the problem is my wedding is going to cost a lot of money, and at this point I cannot afford to have a separate house. Would you be willing or allow me to bring my new wife into our home? And Gurudev said, yes, fine. So Raghu was married, and as Gurudev says, he came home one day, and there's this lovely young new bride of Raghu. So they're living together in this house. Well, the new bride starts to become attracted to Gurudev. he starts to hear her talking to her husband about singing the praises of Gurudev. Gurudev is just smart and beyond imagination. And he thinks, uh-oh, storms are brewing. And it comes at one point, Raghu's not home. Gurudev's home and the young wife is home, and he said she starts talking to him and praising him somewhat passionately. And Gurudev sort of thinks, okay, I either need to take a vacation or something needs to shift. But floating around in the back of his mind was, Sri Yukteswar said I should go to Puri, to Karar Ashram. And he said, maybe this would be a good time for me to go. Gurudev had a friend named Suresh. So Gurudev sends Suresh to Karar Ashram, or to Puri. Find me a place. Tell them that I'm a disciple of Sri Yukteswar, and I want to find a place off the ashram that I can come and go. Because Gurudev wanted to test the water very intelligently. Suresh went there, and he's walking down the lane, and he comes across an elderly monk. And the elderly monk, smiles, says, can I help you? And says, well, I have a young friend in Calcutta. He's a disciple of Sri Yukteswar. He wants to come down here and have a place so he can go meditate back and forth. The elderly monk says, I know someone that just lives down here. The landlord name is such and such. You should go and see him, and rent should be about so much. Don't let him overcharge you. So Suresh goes, makes the arrangement, finds the house, sets it up, sends a telegram to Gurudev. Gurudev leaves the job, takes a leave of absence, takes the train, comes to Puri. Then there's the whole story of Gurudev coming to Puri. They go to Jagannath Temple on the first night and everything. And the next day, the next morning, they get up and they're walking on the roof. There was a roof that they could go up, that Gurudev could meditate in the evening if he wanted. And he looks over onto the campus grounds of the ashram, and he sees Sri Yukteswar, who had passed 2 years before, walking in the ashram. And Gurudev, thinking, is this imagination or what, looks at his friend, Suresh, and says, do you see that elderly monk walking on the campus ground? And Suresh says, oh yeah, that's the old monk I spoke to who told me to get you this apartment. And Gurudev says to him, that is my Gurudev who passed 2 years ago. To which Suresh says, you mean I spoke with a ghost? And fainted dead away. Gurudev brought him around, and that started Gurudev's sadhana. So if you're interested, this book is really a very profound, beautiful book. It almost when I read it, it felt to me, and it's different somewhat in Guruji's style, it felt like he was really channeling Gurudev, because sometimes he talks in first person of Gurudev speaking, and you just feel the presence of Gurudev. At Thy Feet. So with that, my talk is finished. So thank you very much. Please close the eyes. We'll end with a prayer. The last thing I will leave you with. Charlotte Goldman and David Goldman were caretakers here in Gurudev's last year, and Charlotte asked Gurudev, she said, Gurudev, when you are gone, when you leave your body, where will we find you? And Gurudev said, from that place where God is pulling the breath, that's where I will be.